always been one. They always say that rain in Formula One can and will most likely be the great equalizer and can often bring into the fore cars that might not necessarily always be favorites going into the event, but they will actually be able to find a little something in the rain because, as I said, it's something of an equalizer. It won't make slow cars faster, but it will often hide the deficits of certain cars. And well, that was pretty evident if you look at qualifying in today's Canadian Grand Prix, which, as we know, was quite a wet qualifying affair indeed. Because I mean, we went into free practice 3, the final practice session before the qualifying race, where there was a lot of rain. So obviously, the drivers had to take to the wet and then later the intermediate tires. So there was some indication as to where it was that this session would be heading, and everyone knew that there was always a chance that the qualifying would actually end up being a wet qualifying, and that's exactly what happened. And thanks to that, we have in front of us what is a bit of a random, grid for tomorrow's race, if you have to look at it that way, because Max Verstappen taking pole doesn't exactly seem that surprising. I think the Red Bulls did have a fair bit of pace, although Sergio Perez would kind of be ruining his bad luck that he ended up crashing out in Q2, couldn't make it to Q3. In fact, it was his crash that triggered a red flag, and it ended up stopping the session for a bit, and he couldn't actually go out there and improve on that lap time thereafter. So it's a bit of an unfortunate thing for Red Bull if you have to look at it that way, because we had Charles Leclerc of Ferrari. We know for a fact that he's taken a grid penalty and that he's going to be starting the race from pretty much the back of the grid. So because of that, I think the Red Bulls would have wanted to be within the top 10 and actually looking to be in a position to take maximum points away from the race. But I think, they'd still be in a good position regardless. We know Checo's always been a better race driver than he has been a driver in qualifying. So there's always that. Second place, by the way, a shock at second place, because Fernando Alonso, the old wily veteran, manages to get his car onto the front grid for the first time in what feels like forever, if you have to remember it that way. Because if anyone of you can remember where exactly, hello Ricky Patel, if anyone of you can remind me exactly where it was that Alonso last made it to the top of the grid, well, let me know, because I couldn't remember it off the top of my head. Third place is, of course, Carlos Sainz, and fourth is a certain Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton in fourth. I think if you're a Mercedes fan, you'd be very happy looking at that. I think it's the first time in ages that he's actually managed to not only make it to the second row, but also outqualify his teammate George Russell, who starts the race in 8th place, and who actually, for the most part, was showing a lot of pace on the wet track. Remember, there were portions of Q2 where he was actually, on the top of the race. And yes, Tanish Anam, I'm going to take your question and try and make a guess as to where Leclerc will finish tomorrow. If you ask me, I think he'll be in and abouts of the top 5. Anything that he can do beyond that, if beyond a top 5 finish, would indeed be, a miraculous thing. Because again, the Ferraris do tend to struggle a bit with their porpoising. Of course, they've been taking moves to kind of improve that. When I say they, I mean the FIA have taken note, and as we know, before this race weekend, they've laid out some directives as to what would make the porpoising easier, or rather to control or mitigate the porpoising. Whether or not the Ferraris will be less affected, I don't know, because I mean, even looking at today's qualifying, the cars did seem to bounce a little bit, but again, I think Leclerc has found genuine pace in the race. Of course, a lot of it will depend on how reliable that new power unit of his is, because Ferrari, despite starting the season very well, have gone down a rabbit hole of both poor strategy and bad reliability of their car. So I think that's the worst combination to have, because they have a legitimately fast car. The problem right now is that they legitimately don't know whether their car can finish races, which is something we saw in the last street race at Baku. Both cars ended up retiring due to unrelated issues, but Leclerc's problems have been evident in that regard. He was putting in monster qualifying laps, but hasn't really got the race wins, or in fact the podium finishes to show for it. So, I mean, it's a weird time if you're a Ferrari fan, because you have a car that's good enough to actually be winning you races, but poor reliability and poor strategy are kind of costing them. As for the others, by the way, as I said, that there is a bit of a jumbled, it's a bit of a jumbled grid in that regard, that we don't really have the most, let's say, it's not exactly a conventional grid, thanks in a large part to the rain. look at the Haas drivers. You have Kevin Magnussen in fifth and Mick Schumacher in sixth. And of course, you had Daniel Ricciardo, who managed to outqualify his teammate Lando Norris in the first time in quite a while, I think it's been. But I mean, that also comes down to the fact that Lando Norris had some issues with his power unit. Remember, he came out onto the racetrack. He was putting in a bit of a lap, but it just wasn't working out in Q2. So he was out in Q2. He's starting the race in 14, Daniel Ricciardo in 9. One of the other big surprises is Zhu Guanyu of Alfa Romeo. Manages to make it to the top 10, and he's starting only in 10. But, it's a good position for the Chinese driver to actually find himself in, simply because, remember, it's his rookie season. It's always nice to be, up in and about there with the points. And last few races, you can say he's been a bit unlucky. He was getting in decent positions, but again, the Alphas, just like the Ferraris, again, remember the Ferrari engine customers, were having some issues with their reliability. Last race also, you remember he was running up in the points, had to retire from Baku because they found some issue with his car. So very happy for him. As for others, I mean, there were some surprises for sure in qualifying. I mean, going in, if you guys were watching free practice, the Aston Martins of both Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel in particular, had a lot of pace. But that race pace seemed to mysteriously disappear once the qualifying started because they got knocked out in Q1. Not much of a surprise was Nicholas Latifi being knocked out in Q1 because, again, as I said, the Canadian in this season in particular has really struggled. Yuki Tsunoda starts the race in 20th, but that was always going to be the case because he too has taken grid penalties. Pierre Gasly, by the way, that was a bit of a shocker because he looked to be getting some decent laps during practice. He had been doing pretty well. But unfortunately, in Q1, he just couldn't find the pace and he ended up finishing 16th. That's a bit of a shocker for Gasly because, even last race we thought he'd managed to turn a corner, but I mean, this time around he finishes Q16. So Vineet Singh is asking me, how is the bouncing and can Merck surprise? Well, I think the bouncing has improved to a degree, but of course, you have to remember that FP3 and qualifying were both in wet conditions where, generally speaking, the cars weren't going to be pushing the throttle to the maximum, so the high speeds that they were hitting weren't that high, so the bouncing was mitigated in a lot of cases. Can the Mercs surprise? Well, I would put it past them because despite their struggles in qualifying, they have actually been the third fastest car on the track. And remember, the second fastest car on the track, which is the Ferraris, one of them will be looking to battle through the grid. So actually, if you look at it, the Mercs are in a good position with Hamilton in fourth and Russell also in and there about the top 10. Of course, for Russell, I think the key will be that he'd look to get in some early overtakes as well. And so, that I think would be key for the Mercs if they are to actually get into a good position. Also, key would be, can they out-strategy the Red Bulls? Do they have the car that is fast enough? At this moment, I don't think so, but I think they can expect some good points. Giant Slayer says Perez messed up big time today for Red Bull and Russell spun fail big time. You know what? I think both of those points do require a bit of touching upon. Yeah, Perez I think was a bit unfortunate because again, if you watch the onboards, he had turned his steering wheel fully, but he ended up crashing into the barriers regardless. I think there was some problem with what is referred to as understeer, which he was having because again, remember, Alex Albon had a similar shunt in Q2 where he kind of turned his car where it just wasn't turning, the wheels had locked. And so, he was having that problem. As for Russell's punt, yes, it worked out badly. And I saw it as a bad strategy call at that point, honestly, because there were many, many parts of the track that did not actually, they're not dried properly. There were puddles of water everywhere, despite the fact that there was no real rain. I didn't understand the punt of going on to, soft tires on slick tires. I don't remember if he was on softs or not, but I didn't understand the risk of going on to slick tires at that point because again, the track just wasn't conducive to it. And nowadays, it's not like it was back in the last season where the tires that you qualified on were the tires that you took into the race. Now we know for a fact that you can start the race on any tires that it is you want. I think it would have been a good thing for the Red Bulls if they just said, for the Mercs, if they say, we're going to just look to push on this particular lap. on these particular tires and try and get the best out of the car. But obviously they thought that maybe it was worth the punt. As it turns out, it wasn't really worth the punt. And yeah, actually you're right, Chancellor, that both Russell and Perez missed on turn 2. Turn 2 actually did seem to be a problem for a lot of the drivers, because I think there were certain puddles there which were just kind of affecting, the grip, not helping the tires in the least. So I think maybe that's one of the reasons why. Anyway, I think as far as the race predictions tomorrow, I'll just go in with a quick one, because I think the race is going to be drastically different. Throughout the broadcast, what was mentioned was that the race is expected to be a relatively dry one. There's not going to be much issue in terms of rain during the race. Of course, that could change, but let's see. So far, the predictions are that the race will not be one that was in any way impacted by rain. So I think tomorrow is going to be dry. So how it goes is going to be very interesting. I think we're going to see some changing in the order as well, because again, don't forget, Leclerc is going to do everything that he can to power through that field and then get into the top 5 at the very least. Can the Mercs then hold on? Will the Red Bulls be able to actually get their strategies right and hold on to those top positions? Can Perez in fact get through that crowd as well? He's normally very good at doing it, but if he can do it, and if Leclerc can do it as well, we have a battle. How will the Mercs stack up? Again, there's a lot of things which I'm personally very excited to see about the race tomorrow. So do join us after tomorrow's race as well once it's done, because of course I will be with you guys and I will be covering it all from home. Big day coming on Sunday, by the way. There's a lot of stuff going on. So we have, of course, the final India-South Africa match. Then there's, of course, the F1 as well. So plenty of stuff coming tomorrow. Do stay tuned with us for all of that and much more. Promise you, we have some good stuff coming tomorrow. So for now, I will take your leave. Again, thank you guys for always for joining us. If you enjoy what it is that we do, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, I'm Shane Reyes from the comfort of my home. I'm joining you right now, but I will see you all very soon tomorrow for more sporting action and lots more coverage. So bye for now.